Welcome to Unwrapping the Standards. This is the fourth video in our Unwrapping the Standards series. Steps 1 through 4 in the unwrapping process comes directly from the book Unwrapping the Standards, a simple process to make standards manageable by Larry Ainsworth. We have focused our entire process on Larry Ainsworth's work. The curriculum cabinet used his book Rigorous Curriculum Design to develop our entire curriculum design and revision plan. Last year, a group of teachers used his work from power standards, identifying the standards that matter the most. And now we are here with unwrapping the standards. I am also using additional information from a training I went to by Project Gear Up on deconstructing standards for steps 5 through 7. So by the end of the year, what is our outcome? We will have added unwrapped power standards to our units of study for ELA, social studies, and math. Unwrapped power standards are basically a detailed list of what skills and concepts should be taught and in what sequence in the form of student learning targets. We will also have added big ideas and essential questions to our units of study. Each year we will add more to our units of study and revise them to eventually create a comprehensive, rigorous curriculum. So before we discuss the process for unwrapping, we need to know what standards are from the IDOE's perspective. So on the slide you see this long definition from the DOE. I'm not going to read the definition, but I do want to point out the underlined portion. It states that the academic standards are not a curriculum, therefore identifying the sequence of instruction in each grade, what will be taught and how long, requires concerted effort and attention at the district school level. When I first began teaching 19 years ago, standards were listed with indicators below them. We really didn't need to unwrap standards because they were basically done for us. Looking at the new standards, they are very broad. In fact, the IDOE is telling districts that they need to develop their own sequence of instruction, what will be taught and how long. The effort really comes in identifying what needs to be taught. This is where unwrapping comes in. We are unwrapping to identify the skills and concepts students need in order to master the overall standards. So standards define what all students are expected to know and be able to do, but it does not define how teachers should teach. So we now know what standards are from the DOE perspective, but we also need to understand the DOE's perspective on curriculum and instruction. So curriculum is a set of planned learning experiences for a targeted audience that is developed at the local level. So that is what we are creating, planned learning experiences. Our units of study that we are working on is East Porter County School Corporation's curriculum. We all know what instruction is. You can see the definition there. As time goes on, we will be adding resources into our units of study. So why are we doing this? Again, let's look at the bulleted points. Standards are not curriculum. They are not instructional practices. Standards do not necessarily address students who are far below or far above grade level. Standards do not cover all aspects of what is necessary for college and career readiness. We are hoping to improve student instruction and learning throughout this process. We need to learn the standards that are new in 2014. And we also need to understand the instructional shift that occurs with these new 2014 standards. So this is really important. We need to continue to know why we are going through this process. It's not just another thing to do. That's why I keep repeating myself throughout the videos. It is important to me that we are doing this to become a natural part of our system, a natural part of what we do as a corporation. We want our units of study to be living, flexible documents. So this year, we are unwrapping the power standards for ELA, math, and social studies. In future years, you should unwrap standards that students are struggling with on state assessments, as well as any new standards or revisions to current standards. So, what is unwrapping? You may have also heard it called deconstructing. You may have also heard it called unpacking standards. Those terms are used interchangeably. Unwrapping the standards helps us as teachers to put into words exactly what we want our students to know and be able to do. This will lead to deeper learning. Every standard embeds multiple concepts for student understanding and mastery. Standards can be deceiving in looks. At first glance, they may seem to be small, but once unwrapped, you identify several concepts within the one standard. Once you have identified concepts and skills, it is then time to write student learning targets and the DOK level for each learning target. At the end of this presentation, you will begin working on unwrapping your assigned power standards using a template that has been shared with you in Google Drive. There are three terms that will be used throughout our unwrapping process. We have concepts. Concepts are the abstract ideas that point to a larger set of understandings. And content refers to the specific information students need to know in a given standard or an entire course of study. When teachers are unwrapping standards, they use the terms concepts and content interchangeably, just so you know. We are going to focus on the term concepts. Learning targets is also another definition you need to know. The steps of knowledge or content or skills that build on each other in order to attain the standard. It's what the student should know and be able to do. They are written as I can statements for students. When unwrapping standards, the concepts and content are the important nouns and noun phrases embedded in the standards. And skills are the verbs. When you unwrap a standard, you're looking for the important nouns and verbs students need to know and be able to do. So let's start breaking this down. The rest of this video is going to tell you how to unwrap a standard. There's going to be another video in addition to this that will actually show you in our own Google Drive how to fill out the Unwrapping Standards Organizer. Oh, I guess you guys have to jump in place 10 times. I forgot to turn off my Move It. Okay. So again, the rest of this video is going to tell you how to unwrap a standard, and then there's going to be a second video that will show you how to fill out the Unwrapping Power Standards Organizer. So step one in unwrapping standards is to first choose a standard that you will be unwrapping. I have chosen two examples to help you through the unwrapping process, one from the area of math and one from ELA. The topics are geometry and reading comprehension. You will be assigned your own power standards to unwrap. So essentially, step one has been done for you. You will get a Google sheet that will list for all of you each power standards that you are in charge of unwrapping. So let's look at the math standard. Draw points, lines, line segments, rays, angles, and perpendicular and parallel lines. Identify these in two-dimensional figures, and the ELA is recognize main ideas presented in text and provide evidence that supports those ideas. So remember, the standards state in general terms what the student should know and be able to do. It's one thing to read a standard and get a general sense of what it's about. It's another thing to thoroughly understand what it explicitly and implicitly indicates. What is it that students must know and be able to do as stated in each of the learning outcomes? Unwrapping standards allows teachers to know the meaning of the standard inside and out. It also ensures students know what they must know and be able to do. Why is that important? If teachers aren't clear about the full and precise intent of a given standard, How can they accurately teach it? How can they assess student understanding of it? How can they clearly communicate to students the specific learning intentions for a unit of study? Without unwrapping a standard, they can't. So step one is choose the standard. Think of unwrapping standards as making the standards more user-friendly. You are taking the guesswork out of exactly what the kids need to know and be able to do. So step one is choose the standard, and step two, underline important nouns. So we take the standard, and this is how we really begin unwrapping it. We underline the concepts or important nouns and noun phrases. This is what students need to know. Again, the concepts, nouns, are what students need to know. Look at the math example. The following nouns or concepts have been underlined: points, lines, line segments, rays, angles, and perpendicular and parallel lines, as well as two-dimensional figures. These are the concepts that students need to be able to draw. The two-dimensional figures they need to be able to identify. Now look at the ELA sample. The following has been underlined: main ideas presented in text and provide evidence that supports those ideas. Those are the main concepts in that standard, or the nouns. So again, the nouns are the concepts that students need to know from the standard. So you underline the important nouns. Step three is to circle the verbs in the standards. The verbs are the skills students need to be able to do. In the math standard, they need to be able to draw. They also have to be able to identify. In the ELA standard, they need to be able to recognize. So again, step one, you select your standard. Step two, underline the nouns. Step three, circle the verbs. The verbs are the skills that students need to be able to do. When you guys watch the next video, you are going to actually have an organizer that has all of these steps laid out for you. I'm just giving you an overview right now. So step four is to begin organizing the information you have. So when you are organizing the information, the first thing you're going to be doing is listing the concepts in a bulleted fashion. So for example, when I go back to the slide and I see all of my underlying concepts, I want to break those down into bullet points. So I have points, lines, line segments, rays, angles. When I list these, I have a bulleted list of all of the concepts. These are the nouns, noun phrases that I underlined from the standard. So when you first look at the math standard, there doesn't seem to be that many concepts to teach, but when I unwrap, I notice that there's actually quite a few. Now I have a bulleted list of what students need to know for the concepts. I did the same thing for the ELA standards as well. So you first list the concepts. After I created a bulleted list of concepts, I need to list the skills or verbs in a bulleted format. So I have identify and draw. But notice that I put in parentheses the concepts that are related to the verb. This just helps as a reminder of specifically what concept goes with what skills. So I have in all caps identify, which is my skill, and then two-dimensional shapes. Draw, points, lines, line segments, rays, angles, perpendicular and parallel lines. But again, this brings my attention to the skill that my students need to know. They need to know how to identify, they need to know how to draw. And we did the same thing with the English language arts standard as well. We have recognize and provide. So I listed my concepts in a bullet point, and then I did the same with the skills. Then I need to continue organizing my information, and that's going to be by identifying student learning targets. Using the nouns and verbs, we need to write learning targets. Learning targets are statements of intended learning based on the standards. They can also be called I can statements. I can statements are tied directly to your unwrapped concepts and skills. These targets clearly identify what students will be able to know and do in student-friendly language. Transferring the underlined concepts and skills from your standards document into an organizer may appear to be mere word shuffling, but it is much more than that. Even though the first task is to separate the concepts from the skills, the two remain tightly connected. Basically, it's the reorganization of these concepts and skills into a visual format that enables a teacher to grasp a standard's meaning and to determine its degree of cognitive challenge. A standard answers the question, where am I going in my learning? Learning targets show the students the path to get there. These learning targets also eventually lead to common assessments. So as you can see here, I took my skills and concepts and wrote student-friendly I can learning targets. So step 5 is to then order the learning targets. You then look at the learning targets that you wrote in student-friendly language with I can statements, and you determine the order they should be taught. This will be based on your professional knowledge of the concepts that you teach. Let's look at the math and ELA examples again. Remember, standards answer the question, where am I going in my learning? While the learning targets show students the path to get there. So when I look at my math, I can see step by step the skills and concepts that need to be taught in that order. Step 6 is where we get into depth of knowledge. This is where we determine the learning target rigor. When we are determining the DOK level, it's not about the verb, it's about the context. So assigning appropriate depth of knowledge levels to the concept skill pairs can be mentally stimulating, sometimes challenging for teachers to do, but it is also something that teachers find extremely valuable. While working through this process, trust your professional judgment, let yourself practice deciding these levels, collaborate with grade level peers whenever possible, and also agree to disagree while you are deciding on the levels. If there is a question regarding which of two levels a statement addresses, such as level 1 or level 2, it is appropriate to select the higher of the two levels. Keep in mind you can always revisit and revise your initial decisions later. Remember, it isn't about the verb when assigning DOK levels. You need to consider the complexity of the task and/or information, prior knowledge of students at that grade level, and the mental processes used to meet the learning target. So when I look at the first math learning target, I can identify two-dimensional shapes. Identify is the verb, but think of the task. I believe this is a DOK level 1 because the student can either identify two-dimensional shapes or not. Remember, there's 4 DOK levels. You have a DOK level chart in your Google Drive that you can take a look at. In the next video, I will actually be using that chart to further show how to determine the level of rigor. So at this point, we're just looking at the PowerPoint here and listening to my explanation. So again, I feel that this is a DOK level 1. They can either identify it or not. The answer doesn't need to be figured out or solved. The same is true for all the other math learning targets. So look at the ELA example. Verbs may point to a DOK level, but you have to remember it's what comes after the verb that is the best indicator of the rigor. We want to think about how deeply you have to understand the content to successfully interact with it. How complex is that content? So again, in the next video, I'll be using a reading matrix that Karen Hess developed to also help with determining the DOK levels. I'm choosing DOK level 1 for the learning targets for ELA. And looking at the first one, I can recognize the main idea. Well, recognize the verb would definitely mean level 1, but it's not just about the verb. It's thinking about the basic ideas that students need to have, the understanding of the concept. So it's not about difficulty. Difficulty is a reference to how many students answer a question correctly. Recognizing main idea may be difficult for some students and easy for others, but the intended student learning outcome determines the DOK level. Think about what mental process must occur. Recognizing is a low-level mental process. And again, in the next video, I'm going to actually pull up that matrix and take a look at that with you. Step 7 is identify vocabulary. You will identify academic language and domain-specific vocabulary. Academic language are words that students will use across disciplines. For example, summarize. Summarize is an academic language vocabulary word that is used across several disciplines. Domain-specific vocabulary are words that are used exclusively for your content area. For example, the word metaphor. Metaphor is exclusively used in ELA classrooms. We need to ensure students' academic language is explicitly taught. We can't assume students understand the meaning of all academic language. If we are asking students to synthesize information, we need to make sure they understand what synthesize means. Going back to our previous examples of standards, I've highlighted the vocabulary words. I now have a list of vocabulary words that students need to be explicitly taught for this standard. This helps me out with lesson planning. So there are 7 steps to fully unwrapping a standard. The key is this. Once you have completed the Unwrapping Standard Organizer, you need to be able to ask yourself, can I put away the original standard and confidently plan instruction and assessment using only the graphic organizer? Knowing that I've fully captured every important concept and skill students need to learn? Would other educators identify the same concepts and skills? If you answered yes, then you have successfully unwrapped a standard. So what is our goal of unwrapping power standards? The goal of all this is not to standardize teaching styles and techniques. The goal is to effectively teach students the standards. Once standards are unwrapped, we want to encourage teachers to draw upon their own individual talents, creativity, experience, and expertise in helping students gain a deep understanding of the concepts and skills within the unwrapped standards. Again, in the future, we will be adding resources into our units of study as a way to assist our peers in finding high-quality resources that we believe help our students gain the deep understanding of the unwrapped standards. So your next step is to watch another video on how to fill out the Unwrapping Standards Organizer. Thank you.